at La Sierra on the origins of hell. Now, N.T. Wright doesn't really talk too much about the origins of hell. He doesn't mention it, but what I found I had in common with N.T. Wright is that he pays attention, close attention, to the Jewish writings during the second temple period. In other words, he gets into the Jewish apocalyptic literature, he gets into the history, and I immediately became attracted to his writings because he did so much in providing historical context to the writings of the New Testament. And again, you can find him on YouTube. He's got a lot of stuff that you can find on YouTube. And for either one of these names, if you just do a search for resurrection, you can probably find a great deal. Of course, there are many scholars. Bart Ehrman is probably the best known of the skeptical scholars who will simply say resurrections don't happen, therefore Jesus couldn't have been resurrected. I mean, that's basically his entire argument. N.T. Wright and Gary Habermas would say, actually, the resurrection, although you cannot prove it, because nothing, a singular event like this cannot be proven, nevertheless, there is abundant corroborating evidence. So let's get into some of that evidence right now, and we're going to go to Mark 16. And of course, start with verse 1. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Now this ties in with the previous chapter where these same women note where Joseph of Arimathea has put the body of Christ. And we know from other gospel accounts that Nicodemus also helped. Joseph put the body of Jesus in his own unused family tomb. And that is historically accurate and kind of revealing in a way because according to the customs of the times, relatives would bury their loved ones in a family tomb, at least the ones that could afford it. And of course, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were certainly wealthy enough to do that. We also know that both from the other Gospels, we know that Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus were both members of the Sanhedrin. They were members of the council and were, relatively, you could say, secret disciples of Jesus. And now that Jesus has died, it's actually an amazing thing that they are ready to step forward now and take care of the body of Jesus. The women, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, they bought spices so that they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. And they have a little conversation. And they ask each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance to the tomb? So it's almost like they started out on this mission. This little statement is to highlight the burial direction into a story. They do not expect to find Jesus alive. They know that Jesus is dead, and they know that he's in a tomb, and they know that there is no way that they would be strong enough to roll the stone away. So they're discussing this problem. But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. All four Gospels say something about the resurrection, as you would expect. All four Gospels have just slightly different accounts. So, for example, in some Gospels, you will find there are two angels instead of one. And by the way, notice that this passage, this verse, does not specifically say that this is an angel. It just says a young man dressed in white. In retrospect, it seems obvious that this was an angel, but apparently it was not obvious at first. Angels, you see, are in the Bible many times indistinguishable from normal human beings. Now, sometimes they, appear in, other ways that obviously scare people, but in many cases, angels appear as normal human beings. In fact, as you probably know, the word angel simply means messenger. So if someone is a messenger, that may or may not mean that they are a angelic being. But in this case, it doesn't even identify them as an angel, just a young man dressed in white robe, which must have seemed kind of strange. Then the next verse says, "Don't be alarmed," he said, the young man. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him." One of the most important evidences of the resurrection is the fact that all the witnesses, even the enemies of Jesus, agree the tomb was empty on that Sunday morning, on that first day of the week. Everybody agrees the tomb was empty. That's important because it shows that there is historical corroboration even among people who don't agree with each other, even among the people, and this story is not in Mark, but you remember the story about the guards who are paid off to tell a lie that the disciples came and stole the body. Well, if the body was still there, even that lie would have been completely unnecessary and kind of a silly thing to do. So if the body of Jesus was still there in the tomb, then all the guards would have had to say was, "Hey, go back and look. The body's still there." And, no resurrection. Instead, they have to concoct this lie that the disciples came and stole the body, which is, of course, a very weird kind of thing to allege, since you wouldn't expect the disciples, who were hiding in fear, to suddenly show up with such force that they could force their way into the tomb and steal the body right out from under the noses of the Roman guards. So that's a kind of a silly thing, but it was a cover. And it was a way of kind of saving face and you know, trying to deal with something that obviously the opponents of Jesus couldn't understand. But in doing so, the tomb was empty. Four Gospels do not agree in every detail. It doesn't mean that they're incompatible, but they don't always agree. And sometimes you'll hear skeptics say, "Oh, you know, you can't trust the new." You would not want all these stories to agree, you know, word for word, you know, to the letter. Because if all four Gospels basically gave you the same text, the same words, the same phrases, the same paragraphs, and that every detail of every story was exactly the same, what would we naturally assume? Well, we'd assume that these four stories were not independent witnesses. They were all from the same source somehow. They were, you know, maybe it even could imply some kind of collusion. You know, if you find anybody out here in any situation and a couple of people tell the same story in the same words and supply the exact same details, you can be sure that they got together and said, let's get our accounts that were later written down just as they were related, just as they were told. Because if they were modified to make sure that they all agreed, then we wouldn't have as strong of evidence of having these separate witnesses to the resurrection. So the fact that the gospel stories don't agree is actually a good thing because it shows better corroboration for what has happened. So the angel, or the young man in white, says, "But go, tell his disciples and Peter." Now this is interesting because obviously Peter was one of the disciples. So why would the angel say, "But go tell his disciples and Peter"? Well, I think the answer is fairly simple and obvious, and that is Peter had denied his Lord. When the time got really tough and it came right down to it, Peter bailed. He could not stand for his Lord. And you can wonder how Peter felt. And so this idea of go tell the disciples and Peter would have been very assuring to Peter to know that Jesus was resurrected, and Jesus wants Peter to know the good news. And so it's an interesting thing, and it's that sort of thing is corroborated. And you remember in Luke where you have the story of the two disciples walking to Emmaus, and Jesus joins them, and then they go back to the upper room. After Jesus reveals himself to them, they go back to the upper room and they find the other disciples, and they're all ready to tell their story of how they saw Jesus on the way to Emmaus. And the other disciples are there saying, "He's alive. He appeared to Peter." And, you know, which is kind of ironic because Jesus actually appeared to the women first. But what they're buzzing about is not that. What they're buzzing about is that Jesus appeared to Peter. And this is another reason why we know the resurrection story could not have been made up. Because if a first century Jewish Christian or even a Gentile Christian were to make up this story, they would not have women be the first witnesses, because women were not considered reliable witnesses. Witnesses to the empty tomb, the best account of that is in the end of the book of